It took a mere 3 pages to dismantle a reign. Yet, the moment King Charles penned his signature at the bottom of that final sheet, the very foundations of the British monarchy shifted forever. Camilla's status as queen vanished. Her ceremonial powers were instantly frozen. Standing behind this ruthless execution was Prince William, backed by a unified wall of senior royals who had finally broken their silence. What began as a quiet, whispered rebellion inside palace walls had just escalated into the most devastating royal rupture of our modern era. Before we dissect what this tectonic shift means for the future of the crown, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an update on this unfolding crisis. Charles was acutely aware that no one sitting around the table viewed this as a simple family spat. Buckingham Palace, the historic heart of the sovereign's rule, had been transformed into a war room. Gathering in tight secrecy were William, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and a select group of constitutional experts. The king held his pen suspended over a formal royal instrument, the highly specific signed decree used by a monarch to strip titles and redraw official boundaries. Across the polished wood, his eldest son stood in absolute, unyielding silence. There was no path backward. For months, pressure had been building over Camilla's backroom control of household positions, state invitations, private letters, and decisions that legally belonged only to the reigning sovereign or his direct heir. The queen consort had crossed sacred boundaries, directly interfering with Catherine, the Wales children, and the destiny of the crown itself. Anne had watched this overreach with growing fury. Edward had initially hesitated to join William's cause, but his allegiance shifted the moment altered state schedules and blocked invitations, bearing instructions directly from Camilla's office, forced his hand. Slowly, the king lowered the pen, hesitated for an agonizing second, and signed. His fingers visibly shook as the ink met the paper. With that single movement, Camilla lost her right to be called queen. Her status was demoted to Duchess of Cornwall, and her influence within the working monarchy, the vital network of public duties and state offices, was completely erased. In one tragic stroke, Charles shielded his crown while deeply wounding his wife. Camilla received the decree in the quiet isolation of her private sitting room. She stared at the opening sentences twice, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as she looked up at her aide. "Did William force this?" she demanded. The courtier remained silent. But the reality was far more terrifying. William had not acted alone. Anne and Edward stood shoulder to shoulder with him, orchestrating what palace insiders officially recorded as a coordinated family mutiny against her creeping authority. Then, the final blow arrived. A sealed file of evidence containing altered schedules, blocked invitations, and unauthorized directives sent in Charles's name without his knowledge. The crown had fallen from her grasp, but the deepest mystery remained. What was the undeniable proof that finally forced the king to believe his son, and which royal had secretly gathered it? To comprehend how a husband could strip away his wife's royal identity, we must look past the official decree and step into the private trauma of the 4 individuals who forced this reckoning. This was never a simple dispute over titles. For Charles, it was an agonizing choice between the woman who had anchored him for 40 years and the son who would inherit everything he was trying to preserve. For William, it was a direct confrontation with a father he loved but could no longer fully trust. And for Camilla, the crown she had fought a lifetime to secure was torn away by the very family that had never truly let her in. Following the emergency meeting, Charles remained frozen in his chair. Unable to face the empty corridor, he removed his spectacles and stared intensely at a framed portrait of himself and Camilla. A photograph taken when their survival against the world felt like a triumph. He could not bring himself to turn the photo face down, yet looking at it brought nothing but pain. His marriage was his emotional lifeline, but Camilla's silent accumulation of palace authority had set that marriage on a collision course with his sacred oath as sovereign. A sovereign must always protect the institution above personal love, and Charles was now feeling the cold cruelty of that ancient truth. Meanwhile, William returned to Kensington Palace, feeling no sense of victory. Catherine found him standing by the window, silently replaying the exact second his father signed the paper. The prince confessed to his wife that a deep guilt weighed on him for potentially shattering his father's marriage, yet he knew he had secured the next reign. Catherine's role, the security of their household, and the birthright of George, Charlotte, and Louis had all been compromised when those palace boundaries were breached. The future king had won the war, but the son inside him felt like a betrayer. Behind closed doors, Camilla made a desperate call to her sister Annabelle. In a private conversation later preserved in palace accounts, She whispered that losing the crown hurt far less than the absolute rejection by Charles's children. She had survived decades of public hatred, but this strike came from the very family she had spent years trying to pacify. Annabelle listened as her sister's voice cracked, with Camilla finally admitting her greatest fear, that the king would now view her not as his partner, but as a political liability. Anne had already warned her brother in the absolute privacy of his study that a husband's love could never eclipse a monarch's duty to the crown. As a senior working royal famed for her iron discipline, the Princess Royal forced Charles to look at the cold facts he had spent years choosing to ignore. Edward had initially resisted William's aggressive approach, fearing a public media disaster, but that hesitation vanished the moment his own state engagements were quietly rewritten by Camilla's staff without his consent. The Duke saw that this was no longer a personal feud. It was a battle over who held the keys to the daily machinery of the palace. The alliances were set, the wounds were deep, yet none of them had openly spoken about the single shocking event that turned years of quiet resentment into an open coup. The palace had weathered decades of icy dinners and hidden anger, but a single public ceremony changed the course of history. After that night, William decided that quiet diplomatic compromises were dead. This rebellion did not ignite in a hidden meeting room. It began under the glittering lights of a state event, where a single altered seating arrangement exposed a ruthless grab for power. A chair had been shifted, a name had been erased from the protocol sheet, and when William discovered who had signed off on the change, he knew they were no longer dealing with petty jealousy, but an active attempt to rewrite the royal hierarchy. For months, Camilla's office had been quietly extending its reach, altering guest lists, changing ceremonial precedents, and controlling who got access to the king. Ceremonial precedence dictates exactly where royals stand, walk, and sit during major events, a system where even a few inches of difference signals who holds true power. William had watched this creeping influence. Catherine had felt it too. Yet both chose silence, believing public unity was worth more than private irritation. Anne, too, urged them to wait, believing the family could correct the drift behind closed doors. Then came the rehearsal for the Commonwealth service at Westminster Abbey. This massive annual event brings together leaders from across the globe, meaning every seat and entrance order carries immense political weight. Catherine's designated seat next to William had been shifted one full row behind Camilla's personal relatives. Furthermore, Anne's entrance protocol had been downgraded. On paper, the edits looked minor, but everyone in the Abbey understood the message. The future queen was being pushed into the shadows, while the king's own sister was being forced to wait. William took the final protocol sheet into a quiet side chapel and stared at it. He circled the alterations in dark ink, then summoned the Lord Chamberlain, the highest-ranking official overseeing palace ceremonies. The prince shoved the paper forward and demanded to know who had authorized the changes. The official hesitated, glancing nervously at the door, before whispering, "The Queen's office." Catherine begged William not to make a scene in public. Her voice was calm, but William could see the humiliation burning behind her eyes. Her grace only made him angrier. She was once again being asked to swallow an insult to keep the peace. The future king promised his wife he would not cause a scene during the service, but he made no promise to let the matter slide. Immediately after the rehearsal, Anne cornered Camilla with no aides or cameras in sight. Shoving the altered seating plan onto a table, she told her directly that family courtesy had officially crossed into constitutional interference. Camilla defended the edits as a matter of ceremonial balance, but a second draft of the document proved her office had issued the command before Charles had even been consulted. The queen consort had not just approved the change, her staff had acted first and informed the king later. That was the moment William began building his case. Edward handed over altered letters from his own patronages, while Anne provided a catalog of dates, names, and unauthorized commands originating from Camilla's staff. The dossier was bulletproof, but paper alone would never break Charles's emotional blind spot. To save the monarchy, the prince would have to force a direct confrontation and make his father choose once and for all. What followed was not an exchange of polite, carefully drafted letters, but a brutal, face-to-face clash where decades of buried anger finally exploded. When William walked into the private drawing room, there were no press secretaries, no advisors, and no cameras to soften the blow. Camilla sat waiting by the fire, elegant but tense. Charles sat between them, desperately hoping to keep the peace. That hope died within seconds. William slammed the evidence file onto the table, closed the door, and told Camilla to her face that her authority was officially over. Charles had organized this meeting as a desperate, final attempt to keep the war from leaking to the wider family and the constitutional advisors, the legal experts who keep the monarch within the boundaries of the law. The king still believed a quiet family compromise could save both his marriage and his crown. William knew that time had run out. Inside the dossier were rewritten event schedules, blocked letters, altered guest lists, and directives targeting Catherine, Anne, and Edward. William pushed the papers toward Camilla and asked her directly if she had personally ordered the Commonwealth seating changes. He did not yell. He did not have to. Camilla looked at the evidence, then looked up, stating that someone had to protect the dignity of the Queen. Those words froze the room. She had just turned a personal defense into a direct claim of political authority. William shot back that dignity could never be built by undermining Catherine or bypassing the heir to the throne. The prince spoke with a chilling calmness, and Charles recognized that tone. His son was no longer begging for boundaries. He was dictating them. The king looked at them both and realized this family fight was now a battle for the survival of the next reign. Camilla struck back hard. She accused William of searching for any excuse to destroy her, telling him he had never forgiven her for the pain of his mother, Diana. With one sentence, she turned a constitutional dispute into a wound that had never healed. William's face hardened, but he did not flinch. He told her the past was irrelevant. This was about what she was doing in the present. Charles suddenly slammed his hand down, ordering them both to shut up. The sound shattered the tension, but neither retreated. The king looked from his wife to his son, realizing that love could no longer shield her from the evidence. William then delivered his ultimate card. 3 senior working royals were prepared to completely strike from all public duties unless Camilla's authority was legally and permanently restricted. Charles stared at him, utterly paralyzed by the scale of the mutiny. When Anne walked in moments later, she confirmed the threat. She looked at her brother and told him this was no longer just William's fight. It was a family rebellion with massive public consequences. Charles was cornered, refused to act and watch the working monarchy collapse before the global media, or accept the terms and destroy the private promise he had made to his wife. The confrontation had exposed the bleeding heart of the family, but anger alone would not decide the outcome. Survival depended on who controlled the legal machinery of the crown. William had fired the first shot, but the rebellion only succeeded because the palace's most respected and disciplined figures stood right behind him. Anne brought moral authority. Edward brought documented proof of administrative overreach. Catherine brought a dignified silence that made the accusations impossible to dismiss as mere jealousy. Together, they formed a united front that Charles could never dismiss as emotional or impulsive. By the time the king sat down with his constitutional team, his family had blocked every single exit. Charles knew his power did not exist in a vacuum. It relied entirely on working royals, private secretaries, and the public believing the household operated with absolute integrity. A private secretary is the senior official who manages a royal state duties, calendars, and communications, while ceremonial offices handle the events that project unity to the world. Without their daily cooperation, a sovereign's decree is completely useless. William possessed immense power as the heir, but he needed Anne and Edward by his side to prove this was an institutional intervention, not personal revenge. Anne met with Charles before his official briefing, speaking to him strictly as his sister. She told him she knew exactly what Camilla meant to him and why he had spent decades shielding her. Then, her voice turned to steel. She told him his affection had finally blinded his judgment to facts he refused to see. Charles asked her if she was truly ready to humiliate him in front of the entire nation. Anne looked him in the eye and replied that the ultimate humiliation would be watching the family fracture on a global stage while the world looked on. At home, Edward faced a similar emotional battle with Sophie. He admitted that stripping Camilla of her title felt incredibly cruel, almost heartless, but allowing her backroom influence to continue would destroy any future boundaries for the monarchy. The Duke had feared public scandal, but he now feared something much worse. A crown where private relationships could quietly override official state authority. Sophie listened, then told him that mercy without boundaries is simply surrender. Her words locked in his decision. The constitutional advisors entered the king's study with the only legal solution. They explained that Camilla's title existed solely through the sovereign's grace and could be rewritten by a new royal instrument issued by Charles himself. A royal instrument is the highly specific legal document through which a monarch alters official titles, duties, or legal status. The power belonged entirely to the king, but so did the devastating public blame. Charles opened the evidence file one last time and found a handwritten instruction directing that mail from William's household be delayed before reaching his desk. The handwriting was unmistakably Camilla's. The king stared at it, placed it flat on the table, and ordered everyone to leave the room except his son. As the room emptied in absolute silence, William remained standing. Charles looked up at his heir, finally asking the question he had avoided from the very start. Was the prince truly protecting the crown? Or was the future king using this crisis to seize control of it? The moment the heavy doors closed behind the advisors, the constitutional war collapsed into a deeply personal tragedy, a final, silent reckoning between a father and the son who would eventually replace him. By midnight, the debate was over. Camilla's title was purged from all internal royal schedules. Her authority over the household was completely frozen. Stationaries and invitations bearing the word queen were recalled and destroyed before the sun rose. Yet the most brutal consequence was not the paperwork. It was the absolute isolation. In a single evening, Camilla went from standing at the pinnacle of the state to being told she would never again enter a room under the title she had spent her life fighting for. Charles's signature set off an immediate cascade of orders across the palace. Official documents bearing Camilla's former title were locked away. Ceremonial records were altered, and staff received strict instructions to address her only as the Duchess of Cornwall. That specific title denotes the wife of the Duke of Cornwall, marking her sharp demotion outside the ruling circle of the crown. Her independent staff was cut, and all appointments within her office were put under immediate review by the Lord Chamberlain and William's representatives. Every single edit was designed to strip away not just her prestige, but the very network she used to exert influence. Camilla stood in silence as an aide packed away folders embossed with her lost title. She stopped him just before he reached the exit, gently touching the gold lettering one last time, before nodding for him to go. It was a brief, quiet gesture, but it revealed the sheer scale of her fall. She had survived decades of public hatred to reach that throne, only to watch the palace wipe it away in a few hours. Later that night, Camilla confronted Charles in their private rooms, demanding to know why he had not fought harder to save her. She did not point her finger at William first, she pointed it at her husband. The king replied quietly that he had fought for her until the evidence made any defense impossible. She stared at him and whispered that he had chosen the crown because choosing duty was always easier than choosing her. Charles tried to find the words to deny it, but his silence said everything. Meanwhile, Catherine received a confidential update that made the crisis even more alarming. Some of the unauthorized directives sent from Camilla's office had directly targeted the future public roles of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Royal succession planning is the highly sensitive process that dictates how future heirs are raised, protected, and introduced to the public. The princess realized this was never about personal pride. It was a direct threat to her children and the stability of the next reign. William reacted instantly, ordering a total audit of every decision touching the lives of his children. He feared that the walls protecting their future had been breached without his knowledge. Yet his total victory felt cold and dark, proving just how close the manipulation had crept to the heart of his family. Charles left Camilla's apartments alone. He paused in the dim corridor outside her closed door, almost reaching for the handle before turning away. William had won the political war, but privately, he began to worry that he had broken his father at the exact moment the monarchy needed him most. The damage felt completely permanent, until a quiet, late-night meeting between Charles and William shifted the entire emotional meaning of what they had done. Hours after the decree was finalized, Charles summoned his son back. This time, there were no legal files, no constitutional experts, and no formal language. The king stood looking out into the dark gardens while William waited near the door. For the first time since the crisis began, neither man spoke as king or heir. They spoke as a father terrified of spending his remaining years in isolation, and a son terrified of inheriting a crown broken by silence. Charles had specifically chosen Clarence House for this talk, wanting no official palace barriers between them. The residence had been his private sanctuary for decades, and that familiarity stripped away the armor of their titles. William knew the decree could not be undone. A royal decree is an absolute, binding decision issued under the sovereign's personal authority, and reversing it within days would make the crown look weak while exposing their civil war to the global media. The prince knew they had crossed the point of no return. His father knew it too. Charles finally turned around and asked his son if his goal was to punish Camilla. The question carried a weight heavier than anger. William answered quietly that he wanted the interference stopped, not the woman destroyed, but he admitted he always knew her title would be the price of peace. The king's face tightened. For a brief, painful moment, he looked less like a monarch and more like a broken husband looking for someone to blame. He accused his son of forcing him to choose the crown over his wife. William did not deny the cruelty of the choice. He quietly reminded his father that the crown only survives when duty comes first, a lesson Charles himself had spent a lifetime drilling into him. The king heard his own core belief weaponized against him, leaving him with nowhere left to hide. William's professional composure finally cracked when he spoke of Catherine and their 3 children. He confessed that the need to protect them had made him ruthless. He refused to let another generation of royal children grow up inside a psychological war zone that the adults were too cowardly to resolve. His voice softened as he admitted he had acted not just as the heir to the throne, but as a husband and father terrified of repeating the traumas of the past. Charles quietly acknowledged that he had chosen to ignore the warning signs. Confronting Camilla felt like a betrayal of the woman who had stood by him through decades of public exile, and defending her had simply become easier than questioning her actions. William then revealed a vital detail. It was Catherine who had begged him to protect Camilla's personal dignity, even while stripping her official power. Her private advice was the only reason William had rejected demands to completely banish Camilla from family life. Charles walked over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. He told William that the final signature was his own. The king had signed the paper, he accepted the reality, and he would carry the weight of the consequences. In that quiet second, the burden shifted. The prince was no longer the villain who had destroyed his father's marriage. He was the heir who had forced the king to save his own crown. But as the night faded, a new challenge arose. The family had reached an understanding, but the gates of the palace were about to open to a waiting world. At sunrise, the private coup became a national media storm. Phones buzzed across the nation. Television networks tore up their schedules. Massive crowds began gathering outside palace gates that remained empty. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but this announcement felt entirely different because the strike had come from inside the house. A queen had not been brought down by parliament or public protests. She had been removed because the king's own family had refused to serve her. The palace released a minimal, highly structured statement confirming that Camilla would return to her previous title of Duchess of Cornwall and step back from all constitutional and ceremonial roles. Constitutional roles are those legal duties tied directly to the continuity of the state, while ceremonial duties are the public events designed to showcase royal unity. This boundary was crucial. She remained a part of Charles's private life, but she was completely purged from the machinery that gave her state power. The media coverage fractured instantly. Some journalists praised William as a brilliant leader who had saved the crown before backroom influence could ruin the next reign. Others condemned the move as a heartless betrayal of the king's wife. The future king was hailed as strong and slammed as ruthless in the exact same news cycle, while Charles was cast either as a decisive monarch or a weak husband who had broken under pressure. The London Chronicle captured the national shock with a massive front-page image of Camilla leaving a service under the headline, "No longer queen." Outside Buckingham Palace, a member of the public left 2 white roses at the iron gates. One carried a note reading duty, the other mercy. News cameras focused on those flowers all morning, capturing the exact debate dividing the country. Had the monarchy saved its future, or had it punished a woman too harshly? William watched the news beside Catherine. When an anchor labeled him the mastermind of the family coup, the prince muted the screen and confessed he had never wanted to protect the crown this way. Catherine quietly reminded him that doing nothing would have cost them far more, but neither of them celebrated the moment as a victory. He had secured his children's future, but at the cost of his father's spirit. Camilla refused to turn on the television. Hearing the distant roar of the crowds through an open window, she ordered it closed and sat staring at an unsigned statement her team had prepared. The Duchess could not bring herself to sign words expressing a peaceful acceptance she did not feel. While the nation argued over her fall, Charles rejected advisors who begged him to make his next public appearance alone. The king insisted that his first event after the announcement would feature William right beside him, sending an undeniable signal of unity between sovereign and heir. He also made it clear that Camilla would keep her marriage, her private security, and her right to appear at private family events. Her state power was dead, but her place by his side in private remained untouched. The battle had left clear winners and casualties, but the true meaning of this coup would depend on how Charles, Camilla, and William lived within a palace permanently changed by their choices. Once the front page headlines faded, the palace was left with something far more difficult than public anger: the permanent emotional reality of what had been sacrificed. In the end, there was no celebratory balcony appearance, and no final acts of revenge. There was only a family standing in the wreckage of choices that could never be undone. Charles remained king. William emerged as the undisputed protector of the next generation. Camilla remained his wife, but she was no longer his queen. The crown had survived the coup, but survival demanded that love, pride, and ambition all surrender something permanent. Camilla kept her marriage, her home, and her private security, but she held no title higher than Duchess of Cornwall, and her independent office was completely gone. That office had once allowed her to manage staff, issue directives, and make official decisions in her own name. Now, those levers of power were gone. William assumed a massive role in the daily running of the palace, working directly alongside Charles instead of fighting him from across the table. Anne and Edward returned to their public duties, their presence proving that the core family had closed ranks once more. Charles met with Camilla in private before his first public event with William. She looked at him and said she would never ask him to reverse the decree. The Duchess knew that another sudden shift would destroy the crown's credibility and humiliate them both. The king replied that he had never stopped loving her, even when he could no longer protect her title. His words offered a quiet comfort, but no hope of restoration. The love was still there, but the power was gone forever. Later, Camilla sat alone at her desk with her first official letter under her demoted title. She reached the signature line, paused at the empty space where the word Queen used to go, and signed simply as Duchess of Cornwall. She stared at the signature for a long second before folding the letter herself. There was no anger left in the gesture. It was absolute, painful acceptance. William returned to Catherine and confessed that calling this a victory felt completely wrong. He had secured his family's future, but he felt no joy in watching his father lose the peace he had fought a lifetime to find. Catherine looked at him and reminded him that some decisions are not victories. They are heavy weights carried, so the next generation does not have to inherit the same war. Her words brought him no comfort, but they gave his sacrifice a purpose. Later that afternoon, Charles stepped out into the public eye with William by his side. Their shared presence instantly killed any media rumors that the crisis had shattered the bond between the king and his heir. The succession, the planned transfer of the crown from one sovereign to the next stood completely secure. The family intervention had achieved its goal without breaking the line of inheritance. Camilla faded from the center of state power without being cast out of the family. Charles lost the belief that his private love could exist separate from his public duty. William lost the last of his innocence, becoming, in every emotional sense, the future king. And so, the heavy doors of the palace closed on the night Camilla ceased to be queen, not with doubt, but with an absolute verdict. The crown had chosen its future, and every member of the family understood the price. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.